Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. About a third of the properties in Nashville were sold this week at an auction.
16 is a fair amount.
What this could mean for the future of the town coming up. There are more questions than answers about what will happen to the current hospital site when IU Health moves to its new Bloomington location.
There's a certain excitement that comes with that. Well, what in the world is going to happen when that hospital comes down?
Ahead, a look at the tentative plans and timeline. And Owen County is poised to pass an ordinance that would make it difficult to host festivals and other events. The effect this could have on annual events like Spencer Pride. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Brown County, Indiana is a tourist destination, and when visitors travel here, they spend money on lodging, food, entertainment, and shopping at the local specialty stores. There are more than 200 shops in Nashville, and this week about a third of the properties in the business district were sold at auction. Adam Pinsker reports on how the sale could affect the future of the town's businesses.
A near standing room only crowd crammed into the Brown County Historical Society Wednesday, but only a handful walked out as new owners of prized property.
I want to first of all start by thanking everyone for coming out.
Lead auctioneer Jimmy Dean Coffey is tasked with auctioning off 16 properties once owned by the late Andy Rogers.
16 is a fair amount. We liquidated a trust about 3 years ago that had 32 properties in it.
And this isn't just any kind of property. Rogers once owned a significant chunk of the historic buildings in and around downtown Nashville, including buildings that make up the Franklin Complex, Antique Alley, and the Bartley House. They were among 12 properties that sold during the auction. 4 more, including 2 parcels of land on Route 135, a clothing shop at 58 South Van Buren, and the Totem Post a couple doors down, sold before the auction began.
Well, I've been 50. Who gives 75?
The bidding lasted for 2 hours before the highest bids were accepted. Most of the buyers are from Brown County, but their names and winning bid amounts will be kept secret until all sales close. Visitors and residents won't notice any immediate changes to the downtown area, and many of them hope it stays that way. Larry Hawkins says he can close his eyes and remember what Nashville was like decades ago.
You walk into the Nashville house and he had the screen wire and all this sassafras and fan blowing on it, and you smelled that smell in the Nashville house.
And it's important to town officials as well that the charm and history of Nashville are preserved even after the properties change hands. Last week, the council met to revamp its zoning ordinances to make it tougher for owners to tear down buildings older than 50 years. People who bypass the zoning ordinance could be fined up to $2,500 per day. Coffey says he has no problems with the changes.
They just are trying to protect Nashville as Nashville is. And so far, all the buyers and bidders and interested parties that I've spoke with, that's the way they want to keep it as well.
But Hawkins says he's worried about the future of some of the craftspeople who work in the buildings that were sold. Tougher zoning rules won't be able to protect them from things like more expensive leases.
Guys who are tradesmen like that, they can't make enough product to pay the rent. And make a living.
The Rogers estate says new owners of property sold at the auction must honor the existing leases of the tenants in those buildings. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
The Indiana Family and Social Services Administration has temporarily suspended work requirements for people in the Healthy Indiana Plan in response to a federal lawsuit filed just last month. The FSSA says it will wait and see what happens with this suit and similar challenges in other states. Now, in an email statement, Indiana Medicaid Director Allison Taylor said HIP members are reporting successful engagements in their workplaces, schools, and communities. An estimated 70,000 Hoosiers were expected to comply with the requirements. More than 400,000 people have health coverage through HIP. Now with us now is Eva Bell, a community organizer with the Grassroots Community Advocates Hoosier Action. Eva, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now from what I understand, you are one of the Hoosiers participating in the Healthy Indiana Plan. How has this affected you?
So I was actually really relieved when I heard about the suspension. When I first heard about it, it caused me a lot of stress. I have 3 kids, and at the time I was working 2 jobs when it came into effect of July. And between those 2 jobs, my hours would not have met the requirements, and I could have lost my health care. And if I lost my health care and got really sick and couldn't go to the doctor, then I lose my job. And something that was initially a safety net program would have turned into a poverty trap for me and my kids.
So can you explain a little bit about those restrictions that went into effect earlier this year? So
the Gateway to Work program are these paperwork requirements that the state had put on Medicaid. And what it would mean that starting in July, people would have to report at least 20 hours of work. And by next year of 2020, it would have to be up to 80 hours. And if you could not meet those requirements through work, school, or volunteer hours, for about 8 months out of the year, you would lose your health coverage.
So now what would you like to see happen as this moves on through the courts and so forth? And there are these challenges too in other states. What would you like to see happen?
I would just like them to be gotten rid of. They're not necessary. There's already a broken infrastructure with processing paperwork. We don't need any more burdens on those who just want to have health care.
Now you have a personal story. What would have happened to you if this didn't happen?
So if I didn't have health care, actually 2 months ago, I had a sudden case of appendicitis. And the only thing that got me to the ER that made me have to find childcare for my kids so I can get a ride to the ER was the fact that I knew I had insurance. Otherwise, I would have stayed and tried to ride out the pain, and my appendix would have burst. And that could have been really detrimental to me and my children.
We just have a few seconds left. You're part of this Hoosier Action. What's the message Hoosier Action is trying to get at?
So Hoosier Action is a grassroots organization, and we're trying to build a better Indiana. And we want to improve Medicaid and access to Medicaid and remove barriers for people who are just trying to live their life and do what they can and just be able to go to a doctor when they're sick.
Eva, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you for having me.
Now for news headlines and the latest on this week's top stories. The Owen County Commissioners say they plan to pass a controversial new ordinance Monday that would make it harder to hold special events on county grounds. As Mitch Legan reports, some Owen County residents are taking matters into their own hands.
The Spencer Downtown Event Coalition held its second public meeting this week.
It's a group of like-minded individuals who know how important Spencer and Owen County's events are and who want to make sure that they continue to flourish.
Monday's meeting was called to prepare for the upcoming Owen County Commissioners meeting.
We wanted an opportunity to kind of get on the same page about what the special events ordinance is actually proposing. There's been a lot of kind of misinformation out there. We want to make sure that people know what it truly says and they can look at it for themselves.
New fees and rules would make it harder to hold a festival or special event on county property. The Owen County Commissioners started looking at the current festival ordinance because of what they described as petitions from residents concerned about how much taxpayers were subsidizing special events. But controversy arose after those petitions turned out to be form letters targeting the Spencer Pride Fest and calling it overly sexual and inappropriate for children. Special events are crucial to the economies of both Owen County and the town of Spencer, so the coalition has been combing through the ordinance line by line to determine where it can be improved and have solicited help from 2 attorneys.
They've all been surprisingly very consistent in their assessment, and that this is overly broad, that it's discriminatory, and specifically that it lacks substantial due process.
Balish says the coalition plans to show the commissioners how the proposed ordinance would specifically affect each festival, like Spencer Main Street's Christmas at the Square event.
This ordinance for Spencer Main Street literally kicks Santa out of the courthouse. And so I feel like Commissioner Brothers needs to hear, you are kicking Santa out of the courthouse.
The Owen County Commissioners will meet Monday night at 6 at the Owen County Courthouse. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Mitch Legan.
Farmers are usually finishing their harvest this time of year, but a new report from the United States Department of Agriculture indicates only about half of Indiana corn and 1/3 of Indiana soybeans are harvested. Now farmers are worried the threat of snow and colder temperatures will decrease yields even more.
It does decrease yields. You lose more to harvest loss. You can lose an additional 5, 10, 20%. As corn in particular, as the wind blows, corn starts to fall down.
Delayed planting due to flooding this spring forced farmers into a later harvest. Vilwalk says he's renting another combine in hopes of getting his crops in faster. The city of Bloomington and county officials met this week about the expansion of the Monroe County Convention Center. Officials say the city's food and beverage tax should be more than enough to cover an expansion of the convention center that would cost roughly $44 million.
Which is the modest plan. It's not the Cadillac plan, and it's not the bargain basement plan. It's one that kind of hits the middle ground, and I think all of us came away assured that the funding is there.
Bloomington currently brings in about $3 million a year through the tax and has already collected about $4 million over the last 18 months. By summer 2020, those reserves could reach $6 million. Officials from different city and county boards agreed to hold one more meeting where the final details of the project can hopefully be ironed out. Coal advocates argue wind and solar aren't reliable resources of electricity, while renewable energy supporters say coal contributes to climate change and harms the health of Hoosiers. Republican Representative and Task Force co-chair Ed Soliday says the state needs renewables, but there has to be other energy sources in the mix.
Great, if you can make them reliable enough, let's do them all. But I don't think we're there yet.
Democratic Representative Matt Pierce says the task force shouldn't ignore the cost of climate change to Hoosiers just because it's considered a political topic. Representative Matt Pierce also suggests the task force look into energy efficiency and smaller energy sources like rooftop solar in its meetings next year. Well, the state wants to help schools get more locally grown produce into their cafeterias. Indiana Grown is publishing a guide that will help connect schools and farmers. As Brock Turner reports, officials hope the guide will improve health outcomes and local economies.
It was all smiles at Franklin Community High School this week when Indiana Grown, an organization that promotes local farmers and their products, announced its newest initiative. It's a guide for schools and their food service providers that includes information on the Farm to Fork movement and Indiana's farmers who are interested in getting involved. Heather Tallman says the seeds for the program were planted a few years ago, and she believes students will benefit the most.
We look at the school lunchroom as the state's biggest restaurant. And the one commonality between any student that walks in any door of any school, public or private, is they all have to eat.
Franklin Community School Corporation Food Service Director Jill Overton has been relying on local farmers for some of her products for a few years.
We're not having to pick through or toss out some that may not have held up through that distribution process. So I think you'd also have to factor in that that's a little bit of a savings sometimes as well, even though the per pound cost might have been a little more to begin with.
Over 200 farms from across the state are included in the guide. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
Well, after a 2-year renovation project, the fire tower at McCormicks Creek State Park is open to visitors. As Sean Hogan reports, Hoosiers gathered this week at the Canyon Inn for a ceremonial ribbon cutting.
After the ribbon cutting, park staff, donors, and park enthusiasts were shuttled to the tower to get a first-hand look of the improvements made. The 86-foot-tall fire tower received a fresh coat of paint, new wood floors, and a reglazing of the old glass windows in the upper cabin. The Friends of McCormicks Creek State Park raised $100,000 for the renovation project.
It restores the piece of the community that people have loved for so long, and it's going to be hopefully here for 100 more years, if not longer.
Nestled on the highest point in the park, the 84-year-old tower was originally used as an observation deck to spot fires. The park's property manager, Dwight Brooks, plans to follow up the preservation effort by building a concrete plaza around the base of the tower.
They'll have a concrete base, and the split rail fence that you see behind us, that'll be replaced with stone pillars and a decorative iron fencing.
The project is slated for next spring and is expected to finish in July. The total costs for the project are undetermined. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sean Hogan.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. The relocation of the Bloomington Hospital will open up space in town for new development, but nearby residents are worried about the future of the site. And an artist from Austin, Indiana gets inspiration from his struggle with addiction and life in the community that made national headlines for its HIV epidemic. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing.
For insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the Senate.
You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, as the new Indiana University Health Regional Academic Health Center takes shape on Bloomington's north side, city residents are growing more curious about the fate of the current IU Health Bloomington Hospital site. As Tyler Lake reports, one McDowell Gardens resident asked City Limits about what's in store for the site.
Mary Ellen Lynch lives in McDowell Gardens, and she wants to know all the ways the monumental change from hospital to neighborhood will affect her. Everything from noise to street accessibility. So we reached out to stakeholders in the project to see how the planning process is coming along, and how all this will impact the two single-family neighborhoods closest to the site, Prospect Hill and McDowell Gardens. Jack Baker is a member of the McDowell Gardens Neighborhood Association, and he has mixed feelings about the future of the project.
There's a certain excitement that comes with that. Well, what in the world is going to happen when that hospital comes down?
But he's also a pragmatist.
And then we sort of get into the timelines of what's going to happen, and things then have become more concerning because the future isn't well defined.
Bloomington Deputy Mayor Mick Reniason agrees that a lot of the details for the site aren't worked out, but he says there is a rough timeline.
So we're going to have all the way through 2022 before the public could expect to see some redevelopment activity occur on that particular part of the property.
Baker says that means the site, which sits prominently on the corner of Rogers and 2nd Streets, will look a bit rough for a while.
Probably that land is going to sit there for a while and be fairly barren and not very attractive.
And that may not sit well with some folks in the neighborhood.
For those people who are a little concerned now, I suspect they're going to be a little more concerned when things actually, we'll call it, start.
But Baker says many in the area are more concerned with what the site will look like after construction is done than while it's in progress.
It could be very much a neighborhood kind of build. It could be very much a commercial kind of build. And I think from the neighborhood standpoint, we'd like to see a neighborhood in there.
The makeup of the site is still up in the air, but a plan drafted by the Urban Land Institute last year based on citywide input attempts to address the city's housing shortages with a mix of single-family homes near existing homes in McDowell Gardens and multifamily units closer to heavy traffic on 2nd Street. Reniason says that report is a good place to start.
Since we received this report, we've continued to engage the Hospital Reuse Committee. We've actually got a subset of that, a steering committee that's made up of 12 of the original 30, and the original 30 group, or somewhere close to that group. Both of those groups we meet with quarterly.
Baker is part of both of those groups, but he says he hasn't heard enough from the administration of Mayor John Hamilton.
The previous administration was quite transparent. This administration seems to be more opaque. It seems to be more top-down. Decisions come out and they may or may not surprise you, but you don't know what the decision is until it comes out.
He says that makes it harder to know for sure what's in the pipeline for the project.
How is this project going to transpire? Are you going to put the project into one company's hands, and then that company, a big company, is going to take over, do the design, come in and do the build, and then bring the people in to fill it up?
Renaison wants to assure residents that's not the case.
There was the fear we were going to turn the keys over to the site to somebody from out of Bloomington and they wouldn't do it the way that Bloomingtonians would want. We're not doing that.
But he says the project won't turn out like some people wish it would.
If we just say we would like to have a butterfly garden and nothing but single-family homes in the market won't support that at a price point of $150,000 each, then that's just a waste of a plan.
Baker didn't say anything about a butterfly garden, but he is pushing strongly for the project to consist mostly of single-family housing.
I think we ought to start from the idea of 100% single-family housing throughout the project, and then peel back as we need to put in whatever commercial elements that we think are necessary to support a neighborhood.
But Renaison says the site is crucial to helping meet the long-term demands of a growing city.
Our administration is pretty much on the record for we recognize there is a shortage of housing product, and so we're trying to address it, and owning land like this in the near downtown next to two historic neighborhoods, Prospect Hill and McDowell Gardens, that's a pretty good start.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Tyler Lake.
Programs to help young adults with learning differences succeed in employment, college, and independent living are growing in Indiana. As Allison Zeithammer reports, the college internship program in Bloomington serves students who have autism, Asperger's, ADHD, and other learning differences.
About a dozen staff members provide individualized support for fewer than 20 students at CIP. Some students take classes at Ivy Tech Community College or Indiana University. Lauren Buchanan is pursuing a certificate program studying to be a registered behavior technician. Before CIP, she started her academic journey at home, and after she realized there wasn't enough support for her at her college, CIP seemed like the perfect fit.
If I didn't have the support I think I would have not been able to do college at all.
And fellow student Keely Micel can relate. She's exploring different paths and plans to take on a double major. She says that CIP staff has helped her along the way with her progress.
It's certainly nice to have academic support like this.
CIP's academic coaches bring expertise from a variety of fields like psychology, counseling, teaching, and more. They assist students with things like enrolling in classes, receiving accommodations, or gaining skills. Janelle Yonkman is an academic support specialist. She says working with students at CIP has a huge impact on both their lives and her own.
You can see from talking to our students, they have the same desire as everybody else to be independent and to be educated and to be part of the working world. Just to be able to help them and see them succeed is just something that warms my heart, and I just think it's a wonderful program.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Allison Zeithammer.
Untitled Light Gallery's new exhibit in Bloomington tells one artist's story of his struggle with addiction and mental illness. Alex Harrison reports on the gallery called Beautiful Doom.
Brian Johnson has struggled with addiction and mental illness since he was 14 years old. But just when the light at the end of the tunnel started to dim, he decided to take matters into his own hands, and all he needed was a canvas, some paint, and a paintbrush. Now an addict turned artist, Johnson says he's able to fight his addiction and mental illness through painting.
Things I had to do to get to this spot from where I was working from, was just armed with just my phone. That's all I had. I didn't have a computer, just 2 books, phone, some brushes, and paint. And to get to here, it's been a very hard, tough road.
Johnson says he spent his whole life in Austin, Indiana during one of the biggest drug-fueled HIV outbreaks ever to hit a small town in America. He tells his story of his dark past with light. Although some of his paintings may seem gloomy, they hold a sense of hope. He says the gallery is named Beautiful Doom because of how beautiful, yet short, life is.
For the people that come to my show, I want them to just enjoy their time there. They don't have to feel what I felt, but I do want them to hopefully be pleased.
The exhibit opens this weekend at the Mill and closes at the end of November. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Alex Harrison.
Well, it's that time again. Hoosiers will see their clocks roll back an hour this weekend as daylight saving time comes to an end. It's part of a twice-a-year ritual that many Americans want to end. Indiana joined most other states back in 2006. Daylight saving time officially ends at 1:59 on Sunday morning. Well, that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.